this video, old dogmatic Dan is once again misrepresenting the biblical text and smuggling in his own assumptions. This time, Dan is trying to argue that 2 Kings 3 involves an instance in which Yahweh, the God of Israel, is defeated. And so this video is going to be deconstructing and refuting his horrible argument here.
All right, let's see it.
So let's stop here and note a few things. First, let's note that a defeat of Israel is not necessarily a defeat of Yahweh. And this is one of the major issues that Dan commits in this video.
So this is an entirely false accusation. At no point whatsoever did I ever say a defeat of Israel as necessarily a defeat of Adonai. As I have said many times in my social media content and even in print in peer-reviewed publications, they rationalized their military losses based on whatever was rhetorically helpful and exigent. And so usually it had to do with saying Adonai was punishing them or was angry with them. And as I have pointed out many times before, this is the same rationalization that is used in the other nations from ancient Southwest Asia. So we have the Mesha inscription, where Mesha says his father's vassalage to the kingdom of Israel was a product of Chemosh being angry with his land. So the rationalization is whatever is rhetorically useful and exigent, and so it is what the text says it is. It is not always one thing, it is whatever the text says. If the text does not attribute a loss to Adonai being angry with Israel or wanting to punish Israel, you can't just presuppose that. You have to go with what the text indicates.
However, there are many times in the Old Testament in which Yahweh allows or brings about the defeat of Israel, specifically because of wickedness on the part of Israel. So this premise of Dan's argument is not sound.
Yes, there are many times when Adonai causes Israel to be defeated. And how do we know? Because the text explicitly tells us. 2 Kings 3 never tells us any such thing.
It seems at this point that the prophecy which Yahweh gave through Elisha has been fulfilled. They overthrew the cities, they felled the trees, and they stopped up rivers. The Moabite king has now been holed up in the last city which they have surrounded. The Moabites have been given into the hands of the Israelites.
The prophecy is absolutely not fulfilled. The coalition did its part, but Moab was absolutely not delivered into the coalition's hands. The king remained free, the city remained free, the nation ultimately successfully threw off Israelite vassalage.
Now, Dan wants to say that it simply is not the case that the Moabites have been given into the Israelites' hands. What's funny, though, is that Dan actually cited a verse or cited a chapter in this video which undercuts his claim that the Moabites were not delivered into the hands of Israel. In the beginning of this video, Dan tried to use 2 Kings 18 and 19 to support his argument, but it actually supports my point here, because in 2 Kings 18, when the Assyrian king has Hezekiah surrounded, the king boasts about how no God would be able to deliver them out of his hand. Thus, we see the king of Assyria in an extremely similar situation, using language which indicates that they were already in his hand, despite the fact that the last city had not fell, and despite the fact that the king would go on to lose that final battle. So the very text that Dan went to in order to make his point refutes him, and we have biblical precedent for considering that the Moabites had successfully been delivered into the hands of Israel.
So here this creator is naively conflating two different pieces of imagery associated with the symbolic use of the hand as a reference to possession, to control, to power. So in 2 Kings 18, the idea is the hand of the Assyrians being against the nation of Israel. For your hand to be against someone is to refer to you attacking them, oppressing them, putting pressure on them. And we see this a number of times in the Hebrew Bible. God frequently says, my hand will be against an enemy, or against the wicked prophets, or your hand is against someone. And this is not a reference to having defeated them in battle. It is a reference to attacking them, putting pressure on them, oppressing them. And that is what is going on with this phrase that we see in 2 Kings 18:29. Literally, it's L'hatzil etachem miyado. So out of my hand is a possible translation choice, but it is ambiguous. Really, it means deliver you from my hand. In other words, my hand is against you, and it's gonna get you. And God is not going to be able to deliver you from that hand that is going to get you. This is a different idiom from something being given into or delivered into somebody's hand. That is a reference to defeat. That is a reference to vanquishing, because that concept of something being in someone's hand is a reference to control, to possession, to ownership. And so we see when Abraham comes to Melchizedek, Melchizedek says that the Most High has delivered your enemies into your hand, because Abraham has just defeated his enemies. So these are two different pieces of imagery, and probably because this creator is unable to engage these source texts in their original languages, he's relying on ambiguous English translations and imagining that these two different Hebrew idioms reflect the same underlying concept, and they do not.
First, Dan is way too quick to say that there is no reasonable argument to be made that the wrath was from Yahweh. The text in question does not say that it is from Yahweh or Chemosh. Thus, context is important, and several considerations could be used to argue that this is coming from Yahweh. First, the Hebrew construction used to refer to the wrath coming upon them is always used in the Hebrew Bible to only refer to Yahweh's anger coming on his people as punishment.
So it is true that all other occurrences of Ketzef as a noun explicitly attribute it to Adonai, but all other occurrences of Ketzef as a noun explicitly attribute it to Adonai. This is the only occurrence where it is not explicitly attributed to Adonai. It's also the only occurrence where Adonai is not the only deity in view. There's another deity in view. The immediate antecedent is the object of the human sacrifice that immediately precedes the arrival of the great fury.
Second, the warfare that is used by Israel in this section of Kings goes against what is described as acceptable in the Torah, which tells the Israelites not to chop down the fruit trees when they are engaging in a siege of a city.
So nothing about the instructions to chop down the Moabites' good trees is in conflict with Deuteronomy 20. This creator just got finished talking about the importance of context and is now ignoring it, because this part of Deuteronomy 20 is divided explicitly in the text into two different sections. The first section talks about what to do when you are battling outside nations. The second section, that includes the injunction on chopping down trees that are used for food, is talking about when you are coming into Canaan to take back over the land from the nations that are residing therein. And so the instruction not to chop down the trees that can be used for food is explicitly so that you have trees to eat from when you are occupying the land. So Deuteronomy 20 is not about when you are going on a military incursion outside the land of Israel into another nation, and therefore Adonai's instructions don't in any way, shape, or form whatsoever conflict with the Deuteronomistic legislation elsewhere.